call her JB.
Are you ready for me?
I'm ready, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming today. And if this arrangement seems kind of unique, it is. I wanted it to be kind of like a conversation with your grandfather. And Jack Cato, he's so special to me. You're like one of my grandfathers, aren't you?
Yeah.
I love him so much. And y'all are in for such a treat today. I'm Jenny Bennett, and I work for the Advancement Office here at Cumberland. Mr. Cato is one of the original investors of Cracker Barrel, and he's going to talk to you about that today with Dr. Stumb. So let's just give him a warm Cumberland welcome.
Well, I too want to welcome everybody and thank you all for coming out on this beautiful spring day. Oh no, that's not what we have, is it? It's not a beautiful. Did you bring a coat over here, Jack?
Yeah, I do have a coat.
It was cold in Korea when you were over there, wasn't it?
It was cold.
Is it okay if I call you Jack?
Yeah.
I had the privilege of meeting Mr. Jack Cato several years ago, and have kind of watched him and observed him over the course of the past several years, and it really is our good fortune to have him on our campus today. So I have a series of questions that I want to ask you, and then I think if there's anything that I don't ask that you want to just share, we'll cover that, and then maybe we'll have time to take some questions from the audience. And I want to apologize in advance for those of you sitting behind looking at the back of my bald head. I'm sorry, I didn't come up with this arrangement, but that's Jenny Bennett's. You can blame that on her. Jack Cato you are how old now, Jack?
I'm 88.
88 years old. Look at this, Jack Cato's 88 years old and still has a heck of a lot more hair than I have. That's really kind of embarrassing. Well, let's start with your childhood. Tell us a little bit, where are you from originally? Where were you born?
I grew up in Vise Bend in Smith County. It's between here and Carthage. And you had to cross a ferry to get to my house.
You had to take a ferry to cross to get over to your house.
Yes.
To get anywhere.
I lived on the north side of the Cumberland River. And I was born on July 19th, 1930. And we were farmers. My dad had a farm. And my grandfather had bought the farm, and he still owed a lot of money on it. And my grandfather died when I was 4 years old and left my dad deep in debt. And I was born in the 1930s, was right in the middle of the Depression. And we didn't even own an automobile till I was 12 or 13 years old. But we made it okay. We would kill hogs during the winter, and we had cattle. And
did you have siblings? Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have one sister.
And is she younger? Or
yes, no, she's younger. She's still living. She lives in Old Hickory.
In Old Hickory.
Uh-huh.
Well, I want to go on record as saying that, Smith County has produced a lot of impressive people, including former Secretary of State Cordell Hull and former Vice President Al Gore. And also, I would say you're not the most, but probably the second most important, because my wife also is from Smith County.
Yeah.
So I get in trouble if I said you're the most important. So you grew up without having a lot of resources, a lot of financial resources. You left. Now, where's that family farm today? Is it still in your family? Do you own the farm?
I sold the farm after my dad died. I sold the farm, so we don't have it anymore. But it was a good farm. It was bottom land. We joined the Cumberland River, had our spring that ran all the time. It never went dry. And
did you go to school in Smith County?
Well, I went to a little one-room school, and the same teacher taught all 8 grades. So
first through 8th grade. You didn't have a kindergarten.
Had a pot bed. No, didn't have a kindergarten. The same teacher taught all 8 grades. It was just a one-room school. They had a big pot-bellied stove, and in the wintertime we had to sort of hover around the stove.
Like
I had to walk a mile just to get to the school.
You didn't have a school bus?
No.
You walked to school?
I walked to school.
Uphill both ways, there and back?
Both ways. So I graduated from the 8th grade there at that little school, and went to high school in Carthage.
Was that Smith County High School?
Smith County High School. And
Owls, is that right? Are they the Owls? Oh, what are they? Is that right? Smith County Owls, do you remember that? Were you an owl?
No.
No? Okay.
But I got out of high school, and one day in Dixon Springs, a man told me, he was a rather wealthy man, and he told me, let's go in the dump truck business. And I told him, I don't have money, I can't do that. Just got out of high school. And he said he had the money, and that we would just do it. And I talked to my dad, and he said, do whatever you want to do. So I told the man it's okay. Bought me a bus ticket and put me on a bus, sent me to Atlanta to pick up a new dump truck. I don't know how I got back. I didn't have a map, but got back and
that was for the interstate, so that would have been somewhere around 1948.
It was in 1949, 48.
49.
So I came home. I didn't really know how to do that, but I learned pretty fast. I got jobs all over. We built roads all over Wilson County, Smith County, Jackson County. I helped build in Donaldson subdivisions. I worked on an airport in Knoxville. Went home and one day after about 2 years, and my mother came out on the porch and said, "You've been inducted into the Army." Boy, was that a shocker. I knew about Korea, but I wasn't expecting to be inducted into the Army. So...
Where did you have to report for duty?
I went to Smith County. I left there on the 5th of June in 1951.
Okay.
And I went to Nashville and got all the shots, got on a train, and overnight went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And there stayed there a couple of days, and they sent me to Fort Belvoir, Virginia. That's an engineer school. That's the engineer training. So I was in the 16th training company there. Took training for 16 weeks. Engineers have infantry training, and we learned how to put pontoon bridges together, Bailey bridges.
There were a lot of those in Korea, weren't there?
Oh, yeah. We just engineered. That's what we did. So after training there, I got on a plane and went to Camp Stoneman, California, San Francisco. And the huge ship there pulled up to the dock. I had never seen anything like that. It was a General Meigs. It was 650 feet long, 75 feet wide.
Was it a Navy ship?
It was a ship that had been used during World War II to transport troops.
Yeah.
Still in use.
And you got on that ship after a couple of days on the West Coast.
Went under the Golden Gate Bridge. I stayed on the fantail till we faded out. All the lights out of San Francisco, couldn't see anymore. And we got out, it was pretty rough. And we had to stand up to eat. There was 5,000 on that ship. And
how was the berthing? Did you have your own individual berth or bunk?
Yeah, you know how the little fold-down things, you've seen them. They didn't give us anything. We didn't have a pillow, didn't have a blanket, anything. It was so hot down in that hole, you didn't need a blanket. You didn't need anything. And people were so sick, they vomited on the floor, and you had to go. It was so slick, you had to hold to stand up.
Yeah.
And the urinals in the bathroom, the ship would go up, and the water would run backwards. It would come down, and then the urinals would overrun.
Wow.
And
you had to eat standing up? Why'd
you had to eat standing up. Well, that just
too crowded.
Too crowded. Too many. You hardly got out of line of eating one time till you'd have to get in line to get some more. And a lot of people were sick. And I had a good friend that was sick on there. He was so sick that he wouldn't even get out of the bunk. And I would take food to him. And I had no idea that he would never make it back.
But he didn't make it back. Now, was this a friend that you knew from Smith County or from Tennessee, or was it somebody you met in basic training?
Took basic training with him.
You met in basic training. The people that were in your in your platoon in basic training
Well, from all over everywhere.
all over everywhere.
Yeah.
You still stay in touch with any of those folks?
Only one man. We cleared minefields together, and he lives in Florida today. And we talk.
That's great.
And we used to have reunions. We had so many. We had 45 or 50. And the last reunion we had here in Lebanon, we'd have at 11.
Wow.
And now some of them have died. He's the only one I know that's still living that when we had the reunions.
But some of them you said did never make it back at all from Korea, including your
My buddy,
your
no.
buddy on the ship
He drowned.
in Korea.
Yeah. An officer led him across a river, a creek or something. And they'd been on the front. They were going back to rest. And the water had come a terrible rain up above. It came down and swept 28 of them drowned at one time.
Wow.
They had on the field packs. And
Did you find out about that right away, I guess? Or did you?
I did right away.
So mostly, tell us about what job you had. What was your MOS in the Army, and what was the main job you did in Korea? Was it building bridges?
Well, the first thing I did when I first got there, I went on the front at night, and I went 15 miles across the 38th parallel to Chorwan. I had no idea where I was. I was in the worst place you could be at that time. I was in the Iron Triangle. And I went up that night. They came to get me. I'd ridden from all the way from Seoul. Seoul was torn to pieces. There was nothing left. It had changed hands 4 times. And I went up on the front, and they were fighting up there, artillery firing on both sides of us, and machine gun fire up front. And I thought I was going to be killed the first night.
And what kind of weapon were you carrying?
I had an M1.
M1 rifle.
Mm-hmm. So they fought up in front of us most of the night, and the sergeant got me a sleeping bag, but I never did go to sleep. And the firing, all of a sudden, it just stopped, and it was quiet. So they told me the next day to go down and see the company commander, the captain, and I did. And he said, I see you could drive a truck. And
You didn't know those dump truck driving skills were going to come in handy over there.
well, I did. But he told me that he didn't order a man to drive a truck. He said there are minefields everywhere, and it's a dangerous job. And I told him I'm there, and I can drive a truck. And so he said he'd have me one ready the next day, and he did. I had never driven a GI truck. It was...
Was it carrying troops, or was it carrying supplies?
well, it was carrying troops. They loaded up on on the back of it. I'd never driven a GI truck before. And it was really a dump truck. And a sergeant got in the front seat with me. We didn't go very far until I drove under our own artillery. The shells going over.
Uh-huh.
So we went on out, and we were building an airport for L-19s. You're familiar with L-19s, the observation planes for artillery. So we wanted to get it built, and I hauled shirt where put it on the runway and everything. We got it built before Christmas.
Did you have to clear an area to build it, or was it already in a field? Or
It was they had already had it started, so I really don't know. It's sort of in a level field. There wasn't very few level places in Korea,
Yeah.
particularly in North Korea. Once you cross the 38th parallel.
How long was the runway, for example, on this airport you were building?
I don't remember. You couldn't land a big one on it. It was, I'd say maybe, I don't know how far it was.
I'm just curious. I think most of those runways were pretty short.
They were short. It was, but they could land L-19s on it.
And did you get that field in operation and see L-19s actually land on that field?
I never did see them land on it because I never did go back to that particular area anymore after that. It was Christmas Day, and I worked all day on Christmas Day. We had to get that thing finished. They told us to get it finished. And I wrote my mother a letter, and I said I helped serve that day to keep them waiting in line in the snow. We had about a 7 or 8 inch snow
On Christmas Day?
on Christmas Day. And I wrote a letter to my family on Christmas Day night,
That was 1951?
1951. And that was 1951. And I told her I'd never worked before on Christmas Day. We worked all day until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that. But we had a big dinner. We had turkey and all the stuff.
In 8 inches of snow.
Mm-hmm. So a few days later, it wasn't after that. Okay, I will tell you on January 1st at 12 o'clock, 1952, every piece of artillery on the front fired. It was a continuous roar like you never heard before. And it echoed through the hills,
Did it start
and it
at
went
daylight,
on.
or did it start in the night?
It was 12 o'clock, and it started out at just a few guns shooting. And then we had 155s. I'm sure you're familiar with 155. That was the largest gun in Korea.
I've heard that, yeah.
And they were firing on both sides. But it was a continuous roar for 2 hours. And then the Chinese made a push on us either that. So that was the beginning of 1952. And in February 1952, there was around Seoul, the civilians we'd pushed up across the 38th parallel, and the civilians were coming back into the city. And they were going out in there was a complete line of minefields all around the city, like a big horseshoe. That city was never intended to be taken anymore. And the civilians were coming back, and they were told that these mines need to they need to take the mines out. They need to get rid of them because the civilians were being killed with them. And they selected my company to do it. We moved back to Seoul to do it, and we moved in a big school building, and it was all frame building, wood. And we worked 3 days fixing it up. First time I'd been in the building since I'd been in Korea.
You were intense. You weren't in barracks.
That was intense. And those tents were dug in. They were dug down in the ground. And living in a tent city was sort of bad because the bathroom was a trench about 6 inches wide and about 20 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
So at 20 below, you do a fast trip.
I bet you do. Now, how long were you in Korea altogether?
I stayed 13 months.
13 months. So you spent 1 or 2 Christmases in Korea?
2.
2 Christmases?
Yes.
Did you write your mother a letter on that second Christmas as well?
Yes. I told her the same old thing.
No change in the last
Same old thing. But the worst thing I did in Korea was clear minefield. We worked on that building for 3 days to get it fixed up. And on the third night, the best I remember was on a Sunday night, somebody put gas in a stove, and a 5-gallon can of gas blew up on the inside of that building. About 175 or 80 of us in it. And I don't know how I got out. To this day, I don't remember going through the door.
Did some people not make it out of that building?
3 burned to death. You could see them burning.
Yeah.
When it burned down, some more. And we were turned out in 0 temperature with no place to go. No place.
Yeah.
You
What'd
just
you do?
stand out. At 3 o'clock in the morning, we got our old tents, and we started putting tents up. And the next day, they got us everything we had burned. I lost my bunk. I did have my duffel bag.
You drag it out with you?
I drug it, yeah. And some men were standing there in their underwear.
Yeah, 3 o'clock in the morning.
So, anyway, we cleared minefields, and it took us 2 months. The government paid me $50 a month hazardous duty pay. So I got
What was your rank in the Army?
Okay, I was eventually platoon sergeant, sergeant first class.
Okay.
So
That's pretty good. You worked up that pretty fast. You must have been a good leader
I
back
was
then.
platoon sergeant within 10 months. But you got people rotating, and you have all kind of things.
Tell us about the clearing of the minefields. How did you do that operation?
We had old World War II metal detectors. They were heavy, big battery on the back, and they were paired. We were paired up. You had a partner. You worked with two of you worked together, and the man had the metal detector, and he would sweep the ground to try to find the metal, and I would crawl on my stomach beside of him and feel through the grass and weeds and trip wires. I had to find the trip wires.
What did you do when you found a tripwire?
We took dikes and we cut them loose from a fuse on the mine, and we put a cap over them, sort of a white cap, and then we had demo people that would bring a half stick of TNT. We didn't put the pins back in because they were rusty, too dangerous. And we would just blow them in place.
Blow them in place, okay.
We cleared 117 mines. It took us 2 months, my company.
Did anybody, I mean, it seems to me that would be a very dangerous operation. Did some people not do it as carefully as you apparently did and end up injuring themselves or their partner?
We lost a man the first day. I don't know if he lived or died. And they took him away. I did not go in the mines the first day. I was a truck driver, and a lieutenant told me the next day that you're going in the minefield, not a truck driver anymore. I had special training on mines and booby traps at Edajima in Japan, and I knew how to do it.
And when did you do that? When was that training?
After I got off the ship, when we landed at Yokohama, they divided us all off. And they sent me to the school. I already knew how to shoot dynamite. I'd loaded dynamite and blown dynamite and all kind of things before that. So there at that school was really tough training. It was advanced engineering. We had books. We had to calculate how much TNT or Tetratol it took to blow a railroad in two, or a steel girder, an I-beam.
I see. So you did have experience working with explosives. And
I did.
And you did that when you first went overseas on that first transport ship?
Yes.
Okay.
When I got off, that was the first thing I did.
So 13 months in Korea.
Yep.
Any other particularly harrowing experiences that you want to share before we move on? I'm certain we could talk about Korea our entire time.
You could. We'll move on to something else. But you see a watch back there. And I never see that watch that I don't think about something.
Is that watch you wore in Korea?
It was. Out in front, I was on guard duty on the front, and out in front of us, they had a firefight, and a flare went up. It was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I remember.
You remember that particular
Yes.
firefight? What about that particular firefight do you remember? Did you lose somebody close to you in that?
When I went there on guard that night, the Chinese, North Koreans had caught a GI. They tied his hands together and his feet and shot him.
On that evening?
Not that evening. He'd been there for, I don't know how long. He hadn't been shot that day. But I had a lot of things. One night I thought I was captured, but every day is different. I saw napalm planes come in, Navy planes. They came in and they dropped napalm, and artillery. I saw a lot of things.
So,
the body bags.
A lot of body bags.
Yes.
That had to be life-changing in a lot of ways. When you first went over, Jack, did you know that this was going to be for 13 months, or were you on just indefinite orders?
Mm-hmm. It depended on where you were in Korea. If you were on the front, you stay a year. You got 4 points a month. I stayed on the front. And the only time I wasn't on the front is when the 2 months we went back to Seoul to clear the minefields.
Yeah.
And they counted that.
Because that was hazardous duty as well.
Yes.
You saw a lot of men give their lives in support of our nation over there, did
I
you?
saw a lot of body bags. I sure did.
Well, I'll say this again later, but just before we move on, let me offer you my most sincere thanks for your service to our nation. I think everybody, we ought to recognize Mr. Cato for that service.
I would say one more thing about it. Korea was a short war of 3 years, but we lost 33,629 men during the war. They were killed there, and we still have 8,000 missing,
Unaccounted for.
unaccounted for.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for your service in Korea. You came back, and by the way, was your trip back the same? Was it on a transport ship with men who had to stand up to eat? And
yes.
the same way, you got back the same way you got there?
Yeah, I
honestly?
came back on the General Gordon. It was another troop ship left over from World War II, and we came back under the Golden Gate Bridge and back
Did
in
you
America.
watch the lights when you were coming in on that trip? Or
Oh,
I
I
guess you
was,
could've been on the
I
fantail,
was,
but
I was
maybe on-
glad to be back. I'll tell you that.
I bet you
but,
were.
But let me read one more thing here. Let me find my page. We had 103,000 wounded. We had
Were there some wounded that came back on that ship with you?
I don't remember wounded being on that ship. We had 1,100 prisoners of war, 2,700 died in captivity, and we still have almost 8,000 missing.
Unaccounted for, yeah. So
Yeah.
how long did the trip take you? Was it a week on the sea to get back, or 4 or 5 days?
It took about 13 days.
13 days,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah, those ships didn't move particularly quickly.
No,
did
they were just old and big ships. They didn't go very fast.
Yeah. But you came back in through the San Francisco Bay, and you got in processed back in Conus there. And where did you go from there? Did you have some more time to serve in the Army back stateside, or
Yeah,
did you
we-
get discharged at that?
No, I got discharged. We rode a train all the way from San Francisco to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And believe it or not, that train coming through the Rocky Mountains froze up and it was cold again.
Oh, gosh. You thought you'd had enough cold being in Korea.
So got discharged at Fort Knox and went to work at Avco in the aircraft business for a little while. Korean War was over, and I went to school to learn to repair TVs.
Because you got the GI Bill. That was
I
one
did
good
the
thing.
GI, mhm.
One of many good things, I
It-
guess, that you
it
got
did.
out of your Army
Uh-huh.
experience.
I got the GI Bill and
You used those monies to go to school to become a TV repairman?
yes,
Is that right? Where did
Uh-huh.
you go to that school?
Tennessee School of Broadcasting in Nashville, and it was just a trade school. I had a GI Bill, and I went by there one day, and the old man running the place told me he had the GI Bill. He said, you know, it's going to be different from anything you've ever done, because, you know, you're working on radios and TVs, you're working with electricity, you don't see anything.
Uh-huh.
You have to use instruments. So I went to school. I learned to use the meters and the oscilloscopes and all that kind of thing. And before you got out of school, you had to build a radio.
Oh, you did?
And in those days, they used tubes. You didn't use
Sure.
today. You
Transistors.
used to use. You had to really repair things back in those days. It was a resistor. You had to learn the codes on the resistors. And
Ohmage.
I got into the TV business, and I came to Lebanon.
These young men and women around here probably don't understand really much about what, maybe some of your grandparents had a TV that's like the one that Jack Cato is now describing. Have any of you, I want to see by show of hands, how many of you have seen an old tube TV, even know what we're talking about? Many of them
Yeah.
were black and white. Good, several people have. Ron Pavin raised his hand. Richard Grant, you've seen those, of course. But a lot of these students probably hadn't even seen that kind of TV.
Yeah.
Nowadays, your TV breaks, you don't get it fixed.
No, you
throw
just
it
get
away.
you just
Throw it away and get another.
you get a card or whatever with all the components on it that make the TV go. TV is completely different. Back in those days, they were different. You had to light up that picture tube, you had to make about 25 or 30,000 volts to light it. and you did that with tubes.
So did you go to work for somebody else, or did you at that point open your own business in the TV repair business?
I had a job, but you know, TV was brand new. I had a job within 6 months as I was going to school.
Philo Farnsworth was the guy that got the first patent on the TV, I think.
So a man told me one day, the man in Lebanon, and that's how come I'm in Lebanon, that wanted to, he was old, and he wanted to sell his business. And I came to Lebanon and talked to him, and he said he did want to sell his business, so my dad let me have enough money to buy him out.
Do you remember how much that cost?
I don't remember how much it cost. It wasn't very much because the old man that owned it almost gave it to me, really.
And did you take over his shop, his physical
I took
facility
over
as
his
well?
shop. I helped him for 6 months before I bought it.
Uh-huh.
And I really liked Lebanon, and
How many people were living in Lebanon back then? That would have been still in the early 1950s.
what, maybe 10 or 12,000.
Yeah,
Maybe not even that many.
a third of what we have today.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
But did most homes have a TV at that point?
no,
A lot did not.
did not have a TV. So
It's enough
I,
to keep you busy, and you bought the business, and you ran that business for how long?
it took me 7 years to ever get enough money to build my own building. And I built my own building, and then I got it, and nobody had color TV, very few people had it. And I got in TV sales.
I see. You started selling TVs too.
I was the first one in Lebanon to ever put 40 or 50 TVs on the floor at one time.
And did you have them all turned on? You only had
Yeah.
like 3 channels back then, right? So-
Yeah, WSM and maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So,
Now, where was this store? Is it where you are now?
uh-huh.
Tell everybody where your store is now. I've been there, but not everybody.
It's on 212 South Maple Street.
South
isn't it?
Maple Street. That's
Yeah.
the same location where you had
Same
your first deal.
location. They they used the old house that was on that spot during maneuvers when they had maneuvers back in
World War II
1940.
maneuvers. Yeah, how about that?
So I tore the old house, finished tearing it down, built my new building, and went in business. And I stayed in that business for 43 years. I sold TVs and lawnmowers, tillers, all
You
kind
also
of stuff.
sold some weed eaters along the way. Tell us about that story. That's an interesting one.
The first weed eaters were electric, and
Anybody, I want to ask you, a show of hands, how many of you have seen an electric plug-in extension cord weed eater? Dr. Griffith has. Rob Pavin, you're not that old. You've seen all this old stuff. Anybody else?
well, we put a man on the moon before the weed eater was ever invented,
Is that right?
and as simple as it is. One morning a man came in, and I knew him, and he said he wanted to show me something, and I asked him, what do you got? And he said, it's called a weed eater. And I said, what does it do? And he says he cuts grass with a string. And I said, how you cut grass with a string? And he said, I don't mean a string, I mean like a fishing line. And he said, you just got to see this thing. And I said, I'm in the TV business. That's out of my line. And he said, you just got to see it. He said, I'll hook one up. So he went across the street over where the monuments are. And I went over. He had it hooked up to everything. I turned that thing on, and I swept down the side of one side of that monument, and it cleaned all that grass out. So I asked that guy, I said, how many you have to buy? And he said 12. And I said, send them to me. And we put those things on the trucks. And,
On your TV repair truck?
and every time we'd make a service call, we'd demonstrate. And I sold 144 of those things. It wasn't even summer. So the man that invented it called me one day, and he wanted to know where Lebanon, Tennessee was. He'd never heard of Lebanon, Tennessee. And he told me that he was having difficulty. He was the inventor. He said, I can't get people to sell these things. And he said, I'll send you a check for $100 if you'll make a photograph and give me permission to print it. So I told my wife it sure is an easy $100. So
How much did you sell those weed eaters for? Do you remember?
$89.
$89?
I'd making $30 a piece on them.
Wow.
I sold 144 and it wasn't summer.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
So
And what year was that? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
1974. We did the math today.
Oh,
He
okay.
sold 144. That's the equivalent of $25,000 today.
In 1974. And Cracker Barrel started in 1970, correct?
Yes.
So 4 years before you did the Weed Eaters, you were also one of the initial investors in Cracker Barrel.
Yeah.
And I want to hear about that story. I want to hear about how a guy who's driving a dump truck and then repairing TVs gets an opportunity to be one of the initial investors in Cracker Barrel, and how you made that decision. Because that was also a life-changing decision.
Well, it was a lot of money. You talk, how much was $10,000 in 19?
$70,000.
You invested $10,000 in 1970. You
Yeah.
were 40 years old.
Yeah.
And as a 40-year-old, you took 10,000, which is today, in today's dollars, that's the equivalent of $70,000.
Well, let me go back and tell you a little bit about Dan Evans had the idea of Cracker Barrel and built the first Cracker Barrel down at 109. And I'll go back a little bit further. The Cracker Barrel was never intended to be a restaurant. Dan Evans was a jobber. He had service stations all over. And he was looking for an outlet to sell gasoline. And he went down there, bought a piece of land for $15,000. And his brother was in the banking business, Eddie. And Eddie told him that he would let him borrow $45,000. That was all he could let him have. So that wasn't enough to do to build it. So Tommy Lowe had a daughter, and she played basketball, and Dan Evans had a motorhome. And one night they had a ball game in Jackson, Tennessee, and Tommy drove the girls down to play basketball. I think they had a snow that night, the best Tommy said. And there's an old country store across the street, and he didn't want to drive back in the snow, so they had some time, spent some time there. And Tommy was fascinated with the old country store. And when he got back, he told Dan Evans that about the old country store, and he said, that's what you ought to do here. Make it like the old country store down in Jackson.
So he copied this idea.
So
out of
sort of,
Jackson,
yeah,
Tennessee.
sort of in a way. So we, they built it, and it really did well. People came from all over.
But Dan Evans came to you and said, Jack, I'm interested in doing this, building this country store.
No, Eddie came to me.
Eddie came to you.
Eddie came, and he said, Danny's over in his office right now, and he said, he told me, but you put $10,000 in it. My wife was there, and I asked her, what you want to do, and she said, I'm not telling you anything. But Eddie said that Danny said just to give up on it. He said 3 people had told them they would do it, and they backed out. Now they don't have enough. They didn't want the 10 to start with.
So they were looking for 10 investors.
Yes.
They came to you and a few others. How did you decide? I mean, did you decide that just because you trusted and believed in Eddie Evans and Dan Evans, or did you like the concept, or how did you decide? That's a pretty significant investment for really anybody.
Well, I'm a chance taker.
You're a risk taker.
I'm a risk taker. One time, a man, way back, there's a man in town selling snapper riding mowers. He was selling 6 a year. I went to Nashville, told the distributor, you let me have it, and I'll buy 25 to start with. I sold 100 that year.
You're a preeminent salesperson, aren't you, Jack?
Anyway, that sort of goes back. So Eddie and I talked about it, and Eddie said he just liked 2 people. And I told him, I'm going to do it, but this is the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. You don't have anything but one little store down there on the 109.
Yeah.
But Eddie said, we're going to build them across the interstates, across America.
So they had that strategy in mind from the very beginning.
From the very
Build them
beginning,
across
interstates.
By the interstates.
So
For people who got stuck with their girls' basketball team in the snow.
that's right.
Okay.
So it all started. So he used my phone, and he called somebody else. He called a pharmacist, and I almost know he let him borrow the money, but Eddie came back. He said, we got 10 people. We in business. And a few days later, we hired a lawyer and to form a corporation. And one night after we were working on it, we would get the corporation formed. Danny called everybody, said, let's go down to Cracker Barrel tonight. We need to talk about some things, and we'll eat.
So
while
he
we're
already
there.
called it Cracker Barrel. That name,
Yes.
he had the name from the very beginning?
Yes, that was a Cracker Barrel because old stores way back, you could go in, you could get a dime's worth of cheese and crackers or bologna or whatever. And so that's why it was called Cracker Barrel.
And did he get did he apply for the trademark on that name right away? Did your lawyer do that for you?
I don't know. Danny mostly did something like that. I was on the board, but I didn't have. We were the board. We owned it.
Yeah.
There were 12 of us.
Yeah.
So that night, when we all went there, but we couldn't get in because so many people were trying to get in that we couldn't eat. The line stretched all the way down the back wall, down the side wall, and across the back wall. And we had a board meeting on the woodpile.
Out behind the restaurant.
So we decided that night, if business is going to be this good, we're going to have to make it larger. It's too small. So the very next day, we added 20 more feet. So
you built onto that building.
Built onto that building.
But it was only one restaurant.
One restaurant. So we got the corporation formed, and as a corporation, we bought the one on 109, the corporation did, and Ray Fox was really a good manager. And we told Ray, if you'll go to Manchester and show us what one of these things can do, we'll sell you 20,000 shares of stock and you can pay for it on time. You don't have to put your money down like we did.
Nice. Yeah.
And Ray accepted. And he ran his store for a year, and his net was over $200,000. What would that be today?
1.4 million.
$1.4 million in 1 year.
Yes.
That he made off of that store.
So
that was store number 2 in Manchester?
Yes. So we know then that we've really got something.
Yeah.
We bought an old building down there that was 85 feet wide, 250 feet long, and that was our headquarters. That was our boardroom, our training, it was everything.
You didn't have to have the board meetings out back on the woodpile anymore.
No.
So now, have always the Cracker Barrel stores been always company owned, or did you ever think about franchising?
No franchise.
No franchise, ever?
It's always been company owned, and you could buy stock in it today. I looked before I came over here, stock today.
What's the stock price?
$149. No, it's still $179. $149?
You looked at your iPad. I didn't look. So
$179 a share.
Yeah.
Traded on is it on the New York Stock Exchange?
That's NASDAQ.
On the NASDAQ?
Mm-hmm. Last year, the company did $3 billion, and the net was $247 million.
$3 billion in sales?
Yes.
Last year?
Yes.
And the net was how much?
247 million.
Wow.
And the company
That's
has
nice.
started another. Have you eaten in a Holland Dash?
I've heard of them. I haven't eaten. Show of hands. How many people have eaten in a Cracker Barrel? Show of hands. Anybody not? Anybody admit that they haven't? How about what's it called?
Holland Dash.
Holland Dash.
It's a brand new concept. It's made millennials like you folks, young people that don't mind spending money.
That's good. So what about Cracker Barrel also is known for, in addition to having great food, it's known for their, I call it trinkets and trash. Probably Sandy Cochran wouldn't like me calling it that, but you know, all the candles and picture frames and flags.
The
and all that
antiques.
stuff. Antiques, yeah, yeah.
Larry Singleton, one man, has done Larry's father and mother did the first one, but Larry Singleton does all Cracker Barrels. Today we have 655 restaurants.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about the antiques that are on the walls. I'm talking about the retail sales that are in there. Was that from the very beginning too, or did you all add that later?
No, in the very beginning, all you could get was sandwiches. And it was some time before we started with like it is today.
I see.
In the beginning, we had gas.
Yeah.
And
you had gas at a number of the first stores.
We did. And the gasoline was, we found out the people were coming for the food. They didn't come for gas. You get gas anywhere.
Yeah.
And
So you gave up the gasoline.
we gave up the gasoline.
When was that decision made? Do you remember?
After we had maybe 10 or 12, I don't really remember.
So
And-
pretty early.
Yes.
Because there are how many stores now? There are probably,
No, we don't have any gas today.
no, but how many total?
655.
655.
Yes.
You quit selling gas after the first 10 or 12.
Yes.
Wow, that's an interesting.
We found out the gas just wasn't profitable enough, and they were coming for the food.
Yeah.
So I will tell you another strange thing about Cracker Barrel. You don't see a Cracker Barrel restaurant. The word restaurant has never been used on a Cracker Barrel.
Interesting.
Dan Evans and I had a talk about that one time. The word restaurant should be used.
If you're in the food business, you would.
We're in the food business.
Yeah.
But look at today, you go up and down the interstate, and you don't
You don't
see.
see that word, so they still don't have that word.
No.
So that was a strategic decision. Was that?
Dan's dad, his idea was to let people find it and tell somebody else.
Well, a lot of people have told a lot of other people.
So that's sort of, but it in the beginning it cost us a lot because the word restaurant should have been used, because one time I was in Nashville and the 4 young men were there and they asked me where was a good place to eat, and I said, did you try Cracker Barrel? And they said, well, we saw it, but it said it was a old country store.
Didn't say it was a
And
restaurant.
it didn't say restaurant. I said, well, it is a restaurant, and it's a good place to eat. And they were from Canada. And still, I say today the word restaurant should be used.
But it's still not.
Well, we have visitors from all over the world.
And they probably don't stop in, some of them, because they don't.
But
realize
it's so well known today about all local people. And
it's an
then,
interesting decision, though. It really is.
and
So you were on the original board, one of the founders, one of the original 10 that became, did you say 12 actually, or 13?
we have 12 of us.
12 of you. And you served on the board for how long, Jack?
Well, first 15 years. When we had when we first started, we would, let's see, I forgot what I was going to say really, but we.
You were on the board for 15 years.
Yes, and the reason there was 5 of us came off the board in one time because we didn't have a good resume. I'm gonna have a little old TV and appliance store, and who's gonna buy stock from somebody that was servicing TVs?
Well, I want to tell you, you've been an awfully smart and savvy investor as an old farm boy who invested in the TV and weed eater
So-
business.
Anyway, that's sort of the.
Have you ever made a bad investment decision? You said you're a risk taker. Have you ever invested in something that didn't do well?
Oh yeah, I lost $50,000 on one deal. I lost
50,000. What's that?
26,000 on another one.
But you've hit some home runs. You were
Right.
also one of the original investors, weren't you, in Wilson Bank and Trust?
Wilson Bank and Trust is one of the best companies I know of today. They are netting $2 million a month.
And Cracker Barrel's netting a lot more than that. So that's really impressive.
Well, we went public with Cracker Barrel when we had we had I think 23 restaurants when we went public. Today, anybody can buy stock in
Do
Cracker
you
Barrel.
remember what the initial IPO offering stock price was when you took Cracker Barrel public?
When it's $10 a share.
$10 a share.
Mhm.
And today that's probably split many times, but it's trading at $179.
Yeah. The
You
most
still own
stock.
some of that stock, I hope?
Yeah, I still have stock.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Good.
Got a couple of checks a few weeks ago.
That's good. Dividend check. That's nice. That's nice.
So
That's
I
good.
still have it. So
But anybody can buy stock in Cracker Barrel today, and
yes.
it's. I wonder, would you be willing to sell any of your stock at the same price you bought it originally?
No.
No. Just thought I'd check.
50 cents. There's a lot of difference between 50 cents and 100 and.
Yeah.
It was $170. It was $171 yesterday. I remember looking at it yesterday. It's
And it's up
$171.
$8 a share today.
It's dropped off a little bit. It was
Okay.
100. Lost a couple of dollars for
Okay.
some reason.
It's still way up there. Part of that's because of Sandar Biglari, right? That
Well,
guy who.
I guess you can make more money. You today in banks on CDs you can't make any money. You've got today to do it, to make any money, you've got to be in repair business or something like that, or the rental business. The rental business is good. Today, I'm in the rental business. I've built warehouses. We have 5 industrial buildings.
You're in the storage business, aren't you? Don't you have some of those storage?
Well, we manufacture gas cans. This is another thing I invested in. A man invented a gas can that's never been used before for gasoline. It's gasoline or fuel or whatever to put in lawnmowers or tillers or whatever. You don't have to tilt it to put it in. It's never been made before. A man in Utah invented this thing.
How do you pour the liquid? How do you pour the gas out?
You press a button on top, and it's got a little lever that comes down. You stick it right down in the hole. You don't need a funnel.
Really?
You don't need anything.
Sounds pretty handy.
I leased to those buildings, and I invested in that company. And today, we're selling them Walmart's, Lowe's, Home Depot, name it.
Jack, we're almost out of time, and I want to, first off, thank you for sharing your story. I want to give you a chance if there's anything that I didn't ask you, and I want to ask you one final question before we open it up, see if there's some in the audience. But my final question for you, you've had an amazingly successful career. You went through Smith County High School, then you went in the Army. You were, again, thank you for your service in Korea. You came back. You worked for a guy for 6 months and then bought his business in the TV repair business.
Yeah.
And then it's just exploded from there. You invested in Cracker Barrel, you made money in weed eaters and in gas cans and in all kind of, you seem to sort of have the Midas touch.
Well, I'll tell you about one more. And there's a man here in town that invented when you have rebar and you had to tie it together with wire. It took a long time. Had one little old thing, and it just
Cody
a
clip?
time couldn't coat. Yeah, you know about Cody clip.
Tell the story. Yeah, it's a great story.
Did you invest in Cody clip?
I did not. I wish you had told me to.
Well, today Jack Lowry, Low Jack, and the mayor of Lebanon, Mayor Crackhead, former mayor, and we formed a company, and we've already set up 130 dealers across the United States.
He has a product that'll tie rebar together.
And it's a gun. It takes just like fast as you can go now. It doesn't take that time to twist.
With all the construction going on, particularly in Middle Tennessee, that ought to be a very valuable product too.
That's gonna go big.
So let me ask you this, Jack. What's your legacy? What are you? I mean, you're a young 88 years old, and I hope you're around another 25, 30 years. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, you're like me. I mean, we're not going to live forever, and we're kind of in maybe the 4th quarter of our lives. What's your legacy? What do you want people to remember Jack Cato for?
I don't know, really. I just, I'm honest, I'll tell you that. I service TVs. I never did overcharge anybody, whatever.
You've been an honest businessman
I
your whole
have.
career.
If somebody bought something for me and it didn't work right, I took care of it.
Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your stories with us. We could talk all day, I know, and I would love to do that. I want to quickly see, we have a few minutes left, JB?
Anybody questions? I don't
Oh, yeah, we've got a few minutes.
We got a few minutes left. Does anybody in the audience today have any questions for Mr. Cato? Anything that you'd like to ask him? I should have asked that I didn't.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
You were being nice about the weed eater man. What did he say about Lebanon, Tennessee? He called you and he said what?
The weed eater man. He, where the hell is Lebanon, Tennessee? That's what he said. My wife told me that somebody wanted to talk to me on the phone, and the first thing this guy said is, "Where the hell is Lebanon, Tennessee?" I don't know who I'm talking to. But he sold out for $8 million after that. So he did well.
Yes, he did. Almost as well as you've done.
So.
Well, please, you all help join me in thanking Mr. Jack Cato for sharing his story.